بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض
من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. Welcome to our new class, Journey to the Hereafter, where we discuss Surah al Waqiah. And as you know, Surah al Waqiah, many of you know, it is one of the surah, they used to call it some Surah al Ghina, the surah of making money, of actually richness. And reciting this surah gives us rizq, a lot of provision, according to hadith. And I think it's a good time because of the inflation that we have and the gas prices that keep going up. Maybe this is a good chance for us to study this surah, so inshallah those gas prices go back down, inshallah. Or at least our income comes and we can afford, inshallah, cars with V8 engines, inshallah, and we cannot even be bothered by gas, inshallah. But anyways, it causes rizq. And another of the surah is that we'll talk about, because it talks about three categories of people, like as-sabiqun, those that first come, and the people of ashab al-yamin, ashab al-shimal, the people of the right, people of the left. And because the best example, who do you think the best example of as-sabiqun is? The foremost of the foremost. Who's the best example, do you think? Ibn Abi Talib, Imam Ali alayhi salam. Because his iman did sibqa, and his Islam did sibqa to everyone else. After the Prophet of Islam mentioned his prophethood, he was a sabiqun. So some also say this is the surah of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So there's different ways. So we're going to talk about this surah, but because some are new here and there are some other notes I added, we need to know a little bit more about tafsir, how it works. So let's go to the next slide here. What is tafsir? Tafsir means, it comes from the root fasara. And fasara means to interpret, to explain, or to reveal. That's what tafsir means. The little, lexicographical definition is fasara. And the Quran actually uses the word actual tafsir once. We have وَلَا يَأْتُونَكَ بِمَثَلٍ إِلَّا جِئْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ وَأَحْسَنَ تَفْسِيرًا. And they do not come to you with an argument except we bring forth the truth, and we have here the best explanation. So here in Quran, the word tafsir has been used to mean explanation. But when you look at the technical, because you have two types of definitions, one, it goes back to that lexicographical definition. The other is the technical definition. Technical definition from Allama Tabatabai is tafsir means explaining the meanings of the verses of the Quran and unveiling their indications and implications. So that dilalat, what does this mean now? For example, what does this verse mean and what does it imply? What can I get out of this? This is what tafsir means. So let's go to the necessity of tafsir. So I want you to understand this, that the Quran itself is a book that wants us, itself says, to ponder, to think. You shouldn't just read the Quran just to read it, as some people do. They read the Holy Quran and they just read the Arabic. Okay, I did it. I did the Surah Yasin, I did Surah al Waqiah, and that's how I read the Quran. But the purpose of this is reflection and thinking, and the Quran mentions it is a blessed book that we have sent down to you so that they may contemplate its signs, so they can think. We're not going to be like a parrot and just read. And some of the tafsirs that mentions this, it says when you talk about the reward of each surah, it's not like if a parrot reads the surah and the parrot is going to get a lot of rizq, for example. It's with contemplation, pondering, and action. That's the entire purpose. On the other hand, the Quran says it is a manifest book. It's a clear book. So my question is then why do we need tafsir? Isn't the Quran itself sufficient for us to understand its verses? And don't we already understand a lot when we read the Holy Quran? Because it is clear compared to other religious books where you need references, you need for example, to know exactly the places, the people, what's going on, and without understanding these proper nouns or these names, you don't even know what's going on. So, does the Quran actually need tafsir? So we have to get into this first, the necessity of tafsir. Why do we even need tafsir? One of the proofs that we need tafsir is Quran itself, even though it is a manifest book, and you can get a lot of meaning from the Quran, a lot of in a way can influence your life in a very positive way by just reading the Quran. Sometimes you give the Quran to a non-Muslim and they become Muslim just by reading it, because it is a manifest book. But on the other hand, the Quran mentions that we sent down the Prophet and he does ta'aleem وَيُعَلَّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and he teaches them the book. So Quran itself mentions that the Prophet, not only does he do yuzakihim, he does tazkiyah, he refines people, he purifies them, he gives them يُعَلَّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, he teaches them the book. So the Prophet, according to Quran, was sent to teach the holy book. And the Quran didn't come miraculously down without an instructor, without a teacher. So therefore, by definition, the Quran says it needs to have bayan, it needs to have explanation. So therefore, we asked someone that is against tafsir, someone that is against the hadith, ask him this, then why does the Quran say we sent down the Prophet to teach him? And if you want to reject the narrations in the hadith, that means all the instructions that the Prophet of Islam gave, and later on Ahlul Bayt gave, you want to throw that all away, put that all aside, and make it worthless? Or no, we should see and examine what the Prophet said. So therefore, the necessity of tafsir by Quran itself is that the Prophet should explain it. Let's go to the next slide. Alright, now, besides this, that the Quran says that the Prophet will teach, this is why we need tafsir. One, the Quran has exoteric and esoteric meanings. The apparent, Imam Ali in Hadith mentions, the apparent aspect of the Quran is beautiful and its hidden aspect is deep. That yes, you can understand the zahir and apparent meaning of the Quran to some extent, but is that all it has to offer? As the Quran is, for example, a person that dives, it's like an ocean, that some people, they collect, say, seashells or something from the shallow waters, and some dive deep down and find pearls in the ocean. In the same way, the Quran has these deep, hidden aspects, and therefore, we need to be able to know what is the batin and the real meaning of the Quran have. And who knows that? Those that have ilmul kitab, those that have knowledge of the book, the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So therefore, to understand the various multiple meanings, we need tafsir. The Quran does not mention in detail in many cases. For example, the Quran commands the Muslims to pray, fast, and do hajj, but it leaves out many details. So it says to do these things, but let me ask you this, does the Quran mention that Salatul Fajr, the morning prayer, is 2 units? No. Does the Quran mention that, for example, Salatul Dhuhr is 4 units? No. All the conditions, it talks about how to make wudu, but all the things that invalidate wudu, how to do wudu, ablution, all the things that invalidate prayer, for example, what clothes the person that prays. So the Prophet came to with the Quran to explain salat, prayer, to explain fasting. The Quran says to fast, for example. But all those things that invalidate the fast, the kafara that somebody has to pay, for example, or different things, or hajj. So in the purpose of this, if somebody asks, well, why didn't Allah send us the Quran with all the explanations there, so there wouldn't be any ikhtilaf. Well, do you know how many volumes that would be? That would maybe be a book more than 100 volumes. And therefore, if it's 100 volumes, nobody would read it anymore. So Allah brought the miracle of the Quran in one volume. And then from there, after that, He brought the miracle of the Quran. He brought the Prophet to explain the rulings. So therefore, you need tafsir to know the details of the law. The Quran was revealed gradually, The Quran was revealed gradually in 23 years. You know, the Quran itself, in Surah al Waqiah says, "Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr." We descended the Quran, all of it, in the night of destiny. But that was to the heart of Rasulullah. But its gradual revelation to the people took 23 years. And therefore the surahs and verses are not organized according to the time of revelation. And thus the key to understanding it from one surah to another surah, is being able to understand how the circumstances, the history, for example, which surah is from Mecca, which surah is from Medina, what were the circumstances, what is the sha'n al-nuzul, what was the cause or the situation that this verse came down. So therefore we need to have tafsir, for example, that what happened, for example, the verse of purification, 33:33, what happened that, the Quran says, the hadith of the cloak happens and the Prophet recites, for example, or mentions, this surah or this ayah for Ahlul Bayt. So you need to know the exact circumstances. And you need to know others wanted to be part of 33:33, the purification verse of Ahlul Bayt. Some of the wives of the Prophet asked, "Can I be part of this?" And the Prophet said, "No, ha'ula'i Ahlul Bayti. This is my family," for example. So the Quran says Ahlul Bayt, family, for example, household. But who is the household? One hadith Shia and Sunni say the household is these five, ha'ula'i, these five. Us five, for example. These four, us five. These are our Ahlul Bayt. So you need to have tafsir to understand. The Quran is rooted in the limitless knowledge of God and tells people about a world that is beyond the material. The Quran has tried to convey the truths of the unseen world in the form of forms and concepts of this world. Understanding the depth of these requires instruction and explanation. So we have verses that are very muhkam, that are clear, that it's, for example, you don't really need much explanation. It's clear, it's nas. For example, the verses about khinzir, or pork, being haram. So, for example, حُرَّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ لَحْمَ الْخَنْزِيرِ, or لَحْمُ الْخَنْزِيرِ. For you has been prohibited the meat of pig. Swine has been prohibited. In terms of pork being haram, can everyone here agree that this is nas, this is clear, this doesn't need much, in terms of just this, there doesn't need much more explanation that pork is haram according to this verse. For you, lahm al-khanzir is haram. Does everyone agree? Here it is so clear that you don't need any explanation. You know for sure this is what Allah means by it. It's nas, it's clear. You know for sure this is what Allah means. He cannot mean anything else that besides this part, this relationship. He can mean other things from this verse, but when it comes to swine being haram, it's very clear. And you know that Allah has made pork haram. So one type of verse are the nusus, clear verses, okay, in that relationship. Then you have verses that zahiran, apparently you know what they mean. For example, we have anzalna, we have brought down for you a-dhikr. What does the a-dhikr you think here means? We have brought and revealed for you the dhikr. What does dhikr mean? Anyone tell me? What is the apparent meaning of dhikr here? The dhikr means Quran. We have revealed the remembrance, and one of the words for dhikr is Quran. But can it mean something else? Possibly. So when you go to the apparent meaning of speech, maybe those that have studied language know this, that when I am speaking to someone, you understand me based on the apparent and the zahir meaning of my speech. So what it means is, people understand me, But in terms of language, do you know 100%? This is what I mean? In some cases, no. Maybe dhikr, for example, could be Imam Ali, for example. Let's just say. It could mean something else. But Urf or normal people, when it comes to the dhahir, they understand it to be, okay, Quran. But it still can mean something else. Okay? So therefore, your speech is either nas, clear, and you know the intention, the meaning of the speaker completely. Like for example, that verse about pork. Or it can mean, dhahir means that you understand the apparent meaning of it, or if understands apparent meaning, but even that apparent meaning is not 100%. Or if understands it, but it's not 100. If they swear, is this what Allah means? Or if Rasulullah says something else, you say, okay, it means that. But if Rasulullah comes and says, for example, in the first example I gave about pork is for you haram. If Rasulullah comes and says, no, pork in Islam is halal, you will say, no, that's not tafsir, that's not explanation of the verse, that's mukhalafat, you're going against the Quran. So those nususat or clear indications are not everywhere, those in the Quran. They're actually, maybe there's not too many of them. Majority of the Quran is dhahir, we understand, the apparent meaning. The apparent meaning has probative force for us. We have to go by the apparent meaning. If you want to later on ask me, I can tell you. But there are some scholars before that say, no, you cannot touch the Quran. There are some Shia scholars before, the Akhbari or some of them, they will say you cannot understand the Quran, cannot use it. Because the Quran was sent for Ahlul Bayt, for the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. They have knowledge of the book. We don't have knowledge of the book. Therefore, you cannot use the Quran itself. You cannot use it for different things, for beliefs, for ethics. You cannot use the Quran, for example, for jurisprudence, because the Quran is not talking to you. It was sent to the Rasulullah, and the Rasulullah taught this, for example, to Imam Ali or to the Imams, so they have knowledge of it. The answer that we give is yes, we might not know the 100% meaning, but we do know the dhahir. And is the dhahir apparent meaning have probative force? Is it authoritative for us? Yes. Because the speech of everyone is authoritative for us. And that's how we live our day-to-day lives. And that's how the ughala live their lives. And that's how the people of intellect live their lives. And such a seerah existed during the time of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and they didn't reject to it. So therefore the apparent meaning of the Quran is, for us, has probative force. But just because the apparent meaning has probative force doesn't mean that that's 100% what Allah means in it. It means what people understand from it, but doesn't mean that is the real maqsood and the real intention or the real, for example, meaning that Allah wanted. So the dhahir of yadullah, for example, it says hand, right? It says hand, the apparent meaning of it. But then in tafsir, we use other things that we have knowledge of, yaqeen, things that we have certainty, that allow us now to do tafsir of this verse. Or sometimes you could use, from hadith, you can use your aql, things. One of the things that our aql and logic says is God does not have a hand. It's impossible for him to have a hand. Because that's not God anymore. You're limiting him to time and space. Yes, you're limiting him to time and space. So therefore, you cannot say this yad means hand. It must mean something else. Because that's shirk, that's polytheism. So if I'm going to understand this verse, and my aql is telling me that God doesn't have a human shape, so therefore I use something from outside the Quran to interpret the Quran, which is aql, and now I do tafsir of this verse, and I say this yad must mean anything but the hand of God. And then I look more, maybe here, yad, I can use it metaphorically and say it means power, for example. Power. Just like kursi, for example, doesn't mean the throne or chair of God, because he doesn't have a physical form. So I have to use that in a way to be able to do tafsir. So when it comes to nas in dhahir, so therefore those that, meaning of the dhahir is what the normal people understand, but it doesn't mean necessarily that I know what the Quran is saying. I can't swear by Allah This is what the apparent meaning of the Quran is. Therefore, you still need tafsir. Because imagine right now, to make it clear, if Rasulullah comes in front of us, if Imam Mahdi comes in front of us, and they have obviously they have knowledge of the book, and they say this is what this verse means. Can you go against it? No, you cannot, because they know the intention of God. We do not know. So the answer to this, it is a lengthy debate. The Quran, the apparent meaning of it is probative, has probative force for us, the Zahir. But it doesn't mean that you know it 100%. Those things that are nas and nusus, for example, pork is haram in terms of pork being haram. Yes, you know the maqsood of God, you know what He's trying to intend. The third type of verse are mutashabih, which you even know need more tafsir. Mutashabih are verses that are not clear. People go through these verses and they don't know what it really understands, and there you need the guidance of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. So you have three types of verses. Nas, which you just need Quran by itself. It's clear already. Two, you have verses that you know the zahir of the verse, the apparent meaning, but it's like 70%, I know, 80%, but that's enough for people to abide by and follow. And because that's how people live their lives normally, so therefore the apparent speech of everyone has pervasive force. And just like any document today you sign, any speech that is recorded, they say this is what people understand from this. This is, I don't know, those that are lawyers here, they know this better, that the apparent speech of a person is what they're intending. Then the third are verses that are mutashabih, verses that need explanation. So therefore, from these three, two of those you need tafsir. Okay, so that's the necessity of tafsir. Let's go over this. Okay, one of the issues we have is prejudgment. Has anyone here heard of this word tafsir bil-ra'i? Tafsir with my own opinion. And I use the Quran to try, I already have, okay, let's see here. Okay, yes. So I already have a preconceived notion, and I try to push that on the Quran. I believe in something, and says, oh no, I'm going to use the Quran. So to go a little bit faster, so tafsir bil-ra'i is not allowed. And what the mufassir, what the scholars of exegesis have done, is that they don't do tafsir bil-ra'i. That is haram. They already believed in a preconceived notion, and then to try to force that on the Quran. So we have, for example, in this hadith here, if you can anyone see this page, right? Distancing oneself from any form of prejudgment.
Yes.
Man fassara al-Quran bil-ra'ihi falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar. Whoever interprets the Quran according to his own opinion must take for himself a place in the hellfire. So hopefully this class we won't be doing that, and we won't all be going into the hellfire, inshallah. But what is that? So tafsir bil-ra'i is to try to take something without using the proper procedure for tafsir, the proper science of tafsir, and you try to put your own ideas in the Quran. So this is what Allah means. Let me give you an example. Maybe some people might get offended by this example. I'm serious. But Ayatollah Ja'far al-Subhani brings it. And it's an example from Ibn Arabi, Muhyiddin Arabi, and Ayatollah Subhani, not me, says this is an example of tafsir bil-ra'i. Muhyiddin Arabi. Why he says this? There's verses in the Quran that talk about, you can look here, Marajul Bahrain yaltaqiyan. The two seas, they float together. They meet each other. And there's a barzakh between them. There's a barrier. You can see in this picture, for example, there's two seas. There's a barrier between them. And it mentions that they cannot pass. La yabghiyan. So there's two seas that free, slowly, and the Quran mentions Surah al-Rahman. And they cannot mix with one another. Okay? So it's talking about seas. Apparent meaning, zahir, seas, oceans, right? That's the zahir. And they don't mix. And some people from this, Orfi understanding, like, look, the seas, some of them, they don't mix, possibly, so that the whole of this could be like there's seas, and they don't mix with one another, right? That's the apparent meaning of the verse, and there's a barrier. Then Muhyiddin Arabi does an irfani, and sometimes this is the problem, you get irfan tafsirs of Quran that have no basis. and says, no, look, these seas that we're talking about, they're two seas. These two seas, one is bitter, one is sweet. The bitter one is the physical, presence, physical issues of the human. The sweetness is the spiritual side of humans. And there's, for example, a barrier, a separator between them, which is the animal soul. So now he's taking something that he is, and according to Ayatollah Subhani, he's taking, something that he already has preconceived about the soul, the nafs, the lower desires, the physical form of a human, for example, the physical part of a human and the spiritual part, and these are la yaltaqi, they do not mix. These are two separate things. So Ayatollah Subhani says this example should give us a good understanding of what exegesis of the Quran according to one's own opinion is, and how a preconceived notion and belief in a particular science or discipline can have an effect on the actual commentary of Quran, and then say, no, this is what Quran says. Quran is saying, look, these two seas, don't think of it as seas. This is the nafs, for example. This is the physical form of the humans. So therefore, from here it says, no, that's wrong, because for what is your proof? And you can, take a picture of this, because, thank you, brother. So this is an example. Ayatollah Subhani in his book of Science of Tafsir says that you can't just make things up. You need a dalil proof. The dhahir says seas. So if I say seas, the dhahir, I'm safe. Because God has made us to understand language by the parent meaning. Sea is sea. But to say seas now as, some irfani answer, it might be right, it might not be right. As I said, the dhuhur even means that I can be wrong. But as long as I stick with the parent meaning, I'm safe. Unless I have proof otherwise. Now, I'm just going to go over some of our popular tafsirs. Let's go through the first. So one of our older tafsirs is, can anyone read it here? The first one? Does everyone know who Al-Kulayni is? Al-Kafi, the book. Right? So the main teacher, because Marhum Kulayni was born in 255 Hijrah. He was born, some say before or right after Imam Zaman was born. The year 255, Kulayni. So that shows you one thing, that our hadith are so old, and that time period is so well connected to the time period of Imams. That's one of the beautiful things about Al-Kafi, is that he was born 255. Okay? But his teacher, he was in Kulayn, then he went to Qom. His teacher, Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qumi, who there's 16,000 hadith in Al-Kafi. 16,000. About 7,000 hadith of Al-Kafi is from one person, Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qumi. Almost half of Al-Kafi, the sanad first goes back to Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qumi. I want you to go through Al-Kafi and just look. The first narrator after Kulayni says, the first narrator brings us an Ali ibn Ibrahim and Abiha many times, and from his father Ibrahim ibn Hasham. So 7,000, and Ali ibn Ibrahim himself was a companion of Imam Hadi, Imam Hassan Askari. So I'm trying to show you those that, unfortunately, there's a movement or there's a notion in the communities that hadith is not important or hadith is weak, you can't rely on it. Well, look at Al-Kafi, he's born in 255, and his main teacher was the companion of Imam Hadi and Imam Hassan Askari. And he has a tafsir, even though some of these tafsir are not very complete because they're old, and unfortunately a lot of the Shia history and books that we had, a lot of them sometimes burned down. They burnt our libraries, they attacked us, they burnt them, so a lot of the older resources that we have, some of it has been lost. But there is Tafsir Qumi, and he is, this work is a hadith-based tafsir. It's one of the most important Shia commentaries. Haditha Qumi, Ali ibn Ibrahim Qumi. Then we have Tafsir Ayashi. I want you to look at these years. So, he died at 307, but it was a companion of Imam Hassan Askari. You see, when Ayashi died, 320. So again, during that time period of the minor occultation. And the minor occultation was when there was possibility to get your questions answered by the Imam of the age. That he was in a place where they didn't know, and they would send him, his specific representatives would send letters, and people would ask questions. They called these tawqi'at. They were stamped or whatever by the imam, or sealed by the imam, and they knew it was from him. Questions they would go and send to the imam and would come back. So this is during the time of also the minor occultation, where there was a contact with the imam before the major occultation. So you see Tafsir Ayashi. Tafsir Ayashi, I believe also is not complete. Interesting thing about Ayashi, or Muhammad ibn Masud Ayashi, he was previously Sunni, and then he becomes Shia, and he becomes one of our very important scholar, and he was also very rich. He had, they say, in terms of weight, a large sum, huge amount of gold he had, inheritance. And that he spent all of this after he became a scholar, and also he became, Shia. He spent all of this in the way of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, all his money and inheritance that he had. Then you have here, later on, so this is, in order, Sheikh Tusi, now you're talking about Najaf, Sheikh Ta'ifa, the Sheikh that possibly years after him no one claimed ijtihad. You have Al-Tibyan fi Tafsir al-Quran, which is the first comprehensive Shia commentary of the Quran by Muhammad ibn Hassan at-Tusi. Hopefully when you go to Najaf you can visit. Then we have here Sayyid Sharif al-Radi. Who can tell me who Sharif al-Radi is? Compiler of Nahjul Balagha, right? Then you have this very popular work that I'm sure if you heard, Majma'ul Bayan. Majma'ul Bayan is very popular, it's a very good book. This is from 548 after Hijri, and this is from Fadl ibn Hassan Tabrisi. And Shia and Sunni scholars refer to this because it includes, the structure, accuracy, clear interpretation, and impartiality of his commentary. Somebody on Instagram saying, well, no, you're always impartial when you're doing tafsir, but no, there's a way to be impartial when somebody fights against his nafs, his lower desires, and he examines things without, any bias, then he's objective. And he examines these things with grammar, and then one thing is he looks at also the grammar, semantics, and the occasions of revelation, sha'n al-nuzul, and these are related to hadith. Then we have commentary of Abu al-Fut al-Razi. We have Tafsir al-Safi. Many people would love the traditional ulama you see in their hands will be Tafsir al-Safi. It's from Mullah Muhsin Fayd Kashani. And he tried to present a kind of exegesis that is free from the opinions and that are not rooted in revelation. And for this reason he called it a-Safi. Anyway, so it contains theological, mystical, literal, Then you have from Mullah Sadra, a philosopher, Tafsir al-Quran al-Kareem. And you have Al-Mizan that you heard of Allama Tabatabai, who died around 20 years ago. And you have a Tafsir Namuneh that is not in this list. So those are our main Tafsir books. We will be using primarily, because of its ease, Tafsir Namuneh, which I have here already for you. And it does a very good job because I explained that this tafsir, I don't know if anyone saw the documentary about Ayatollah Maikaram Shah's life. He did this on the weekends because he's a jurist and he would teach. This is what, if you use your weekends wisely, he took a group of scholars, I think 10 or 12, and they would do research. And this is one of the first, maybe, did I know, a tafsir that has been done collectively and by 10 or 12 scholars, and they would come and read all the tafsirs, each person, and they would present in one form, and Ayatollah Maikaram would review these and see which one of this is appropriate, which one is not. So this is a group work, and that is why in some aspects it is, compared to other tafsirs, it doesn't miss some things because you have like 10, 12 people working on it, scholars working on it, and under the guidance of Ayatollah Maikaram Shirazi, who is also a marja taqlid, and one of the things about him that is maybe exceptional is his ability to write. And they're talking about he could be a journalist. They say the way that he writes, he had a very strong ability to be able to communicate and write very well. So this is about the tafsir that we gave today. We're just going to end the recording right now, and then we're going to Q&A. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
الرافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء